Welcome to another edition of Hey Bobby with Senior VP of the Cleveland Guardians, Bob DiBiasio, with us on WAKR. And Bob, I thought we would talk about maybe a guy that you know so well with the Indians/Guardians, but not everyone might not understand his tenure with the club, the longevity with the club, and the impact he had on this baseball team for many decades. And that's Mel Harder. And I know you knew Mel, and I had a chance to meet him when I first came in 25 years ago when we did the celebration of that picture there behind you. I remember meeting him for the very first time on that day. But talk about Mel Harder from the franchise's perspective, my friend.
One of my all-time favorites. Such a remarkable gentleman. He wore a Cleveland uniform longer than any other person in our franchise history. 36 consecutive years, Ray, that he wore our uniform. Longest tenured player in the history of our franchise. He pitched for 20 years. He 1928 to 1947. And then in the 1948 season, he became our pitching coach. And for the next 16 years, through 63, he ends up being the pitching coach. And back then, pitching coaches, it was somewhat of a relatively new thing where somebody was completely focused on just the pitching staff. And he again did it for 16 seasons through the 48 season, the world champs, the 50s, the big four, all the great pitching staffs of the Lemon Fellers, Wins, Garcia, all of them. He was their pitching coach, and he made his mark on our franchise. We retired as number 18 in 1990. It was the fourth number to be retired by us, one of 8 players to have their uniform retired. He's the only one of our retired uniform guys not in Cooperstown, not in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. Part of the reason we did so is because he was the longest tenured, player coach in the history of our franchise, 36 straight seasons. But he also won 223 games, which is more than a number of people in the Hall of Fame. And we were trying to get the Hall of Fame to acknowledge his achievements in Major League Baseball in our franchise. And it just never clicked with the Veterans Committee, sadly. But a true gentleman.
When you look at Mel Harder, and that you kind of took my next question, but I'll let you expand a little bit. Not only the longevity, but how good he was. And sometimes when people talk, Bobby, about Mel Harder, they said, oh, yeah, all those years he was in our uniform. They forget to realize how good he was on the mound.
Again, 223
Yeah.
wins, number 2 all time on our franchise list behind the great Bob Feller, who had 266. Mel Harder ranks in the top 5 in most every pitching category in our franchise history. You're talking wins, innings pitched, game starts, complete game shutouts, all of those statistics. And we are a pretty deep pitching rich franchise. And so for him to be dotted still among the top 5 in franchise history. Here's a guy that was a 4-time All-Star, 1934, 5, 6, and 7. I believe, Ray, he still holds the record, the major league record in All-Star games. Over those 4 consecutive All-Star appearances, he threw 13 scoreless innings. And I think there was a period when it was absolutely a major league record. I believe it still holds true today. We'd have to check on that one. But there was a long period of time when his 13 scoreless innings and 4 All-Star appearances was a major league record. So his ability to not only he won 15 games or more. I think it was 8 times, double figures 14 times out of his 20 years. And then as a pitching coach, one other thing on Mel I have to share is he and Charlie Nagy, which is one of the coolest things I will remember as my career has lasted as long as it has, is being able to put those two together. And they struck up a bond that just makes my heart glow, to be honest with you. We did an event at the ballpark before. What, you can't build a ballpark until you identify where home plate is. Everything goes off of home plate. All the stands, the field, obviously, but
Yeah.
home plate has to be identified. So once we identified on the Gateway site where home plate was, we threw a big party, and Levy Restaurants, who was doing our suites, threw a huge feast, and we had all our suite people, and we were selling suites with this event, and we had Sandy Alomar catching and Charlie Nagy and Mel Harder. And Mel wore his 1931. We got him a 1931 uniform because he pitched the very first game ever against Lefty Grove of Philadelphia to open Cleveland Stadium. So we were able to close Cleveland Stadium with Mel Harder, who pitched the very first game ever, baseball game ever at Cleveland Stadium. And he lost 1-0 to Lefty Grove. And he was able to toss the final pitch after the final baseball game played at Cleveland Stadium, which is just the coolest thing.
Yeah.
And then at this little ceremony, this little event that we had, Charlie Nagy threw a first pitch to Sandy, and then Mel Harder tossed it. And all of a sudden, there's all these people everywhere just walking around, getting a look at the skyline, saying this is going to be this beautiful baseball only ballpark. And down what would be the left field line, and down the left field line, there's 2 gentlemen, and it's Mel Harder and Charlie Nagy. And Mel Harder has Charlie's hand in his hand over a baseball, showing him afterwards. I asked, he was showing him how he used to throw his curveball, where he put his fingers. Mel Harder would call me during games on TV in the press box when Charlie was pitching and say, you go tell Charlie he's moving on the rubber a little bit to make sure that he's now cutting the plate in half. So he needs to just move back over just a step so he has more of the plate to throw strikes. And I felt comfortable enough to go to Charlie and say, hey, Mel called. And Charlie would call Mel and they would talk. That's the kind of relationship they had.
Wow.
And
It's
it
fabulous.
was so very special.
That is cool. Senior VP with the Cleveland Guardians, Bob DiBiasio, with us with Hey Bobby. Bobby, the other thing I wanted to bring up this week, I've had probably in the last couple of weeks, as people starting to really talk about Stephen Vogt, the manager, and how good the team is doing. A lot of people are saying, hey, what's Tito up to? Is he at the stadium a lot? And I'm saying, I don't think so, but I don't really know. And I know you have a special relationship with Tito. What has he been up to the last 4 or 5 months?
One, he's working on himself. He's getting healthy. He's dropped some pounds, like 20 plus pounds. He's having fun. He's been able, Boston had the 20th anniversary of the 2004 World Series champs, and they took that opportunity to honor Tim Wakefield and his wife, Stacy, who sadly passed away. Tim Wakefield passed away, and then a couple months later, his wife passed away. And so Tito was the narrator of a beautiful video in honor of Tim and Stacy Wakefield up at Fenway. He went back David Ortiz's charity golf outing. He was able to do that, which he's never been able to do. He's going to Ballybunion this summer, things he's never done. He is actually, Ray, the U.S. Senior Open golf tournament. The Senior Open is in Rhode Island, in Newport Country Club. And Tito is the Grand Marshal or whatever they call it this summer. So he's all excited. I mean, those are the things he's doing. He baseball wise, there we have the #1 draft pick, as you know, and there's a kid at Oregon State where Stephen Kwan played, a second baseman, an Australian kid who is thought of as being the best hitter in this class. And there's one mock draft I saw that we were going to pick him #1. And so when Oregon State went to Arizona, to Tucson to play a weekend series, Tito went over and scouted him for Chris and Cherney and the group. He was just in town, Ray. I'm not sure if you knew that he was just in town last Thursday night at the ballpark. The Sam Ratigliano Foundation has a program called Sam's Scholars, where they provide educational and personal development resources for the underserved community. And every year they, to add sparkle to their fundraising event, they have what's called a Cleveland Legend. And as you could imagine, they've gone through the whole Cardiac Kids era, honoring, that group. And so Carrie Rutigliano, Sam's daughter, who's a teacher in the Mayfield school system for 30 plus years, called me and said, do you think, Terry would be willing to be our Cleveland Legend? So when I called him, he said yes. And so he was flying home from the David Ortiz golf tournament. He stopped in. And so we spent last Thursday together as he was the keynote speaker of that. The timing worked out for him. And so we were able to see him last Thursday and spend a number of hours with him. He looks good. He hadn't been to a ball game of ours yet, but he stays in touch with our guys, but he's doing well.
That's what everyone wanted to know. Senior VP with our Cleveland Guardians, Bob DiBiasio, this week's of Hey Bobby. You can, of course, check that out, our YouTube channel, Facebook page, WAKR.net, right here on the Ray Horner Morning Show. Bobby, as always, my friend, thank you for the time. Always appreciate it. We'll do it again next week.
It was fun talking about two of my absolute favorites, Ray. So very kind of you. Go Guardians.